Welcome back to the Soul Synergy Network podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Irma Elisheva Diaz. Today, we're entering one of the quieter, more misunderstood landscapes of grief, a place many people live in silently for years, sometimes even decades, without ever being given language for what they're carrying. Today, we're talking about chronic grief. And I want to be very clear at the outset. I'm not suggesting that chronic grief is new. Grief has always taken many forms. What is new is how common this experience has become. Because of the collective stress, cumulative losses, and unresolved disruptions of recent years. Chronic grief is the grief that doesn't follow the timeline society expects. It doesn't wrap up. It doesn't disappear on schedule. It stays. It returns in waves. It remains tender long after the world assumes you should be back to normal. And I want to say this clearly. Chronic grief is not a failure. It is not a weakness. It is not proof that something is wrong with you. Chronic grief simply tells the truth. Some losses touch us so deeply that they reshape us. And healing, in those cases, is not quick. It is layered. And yes, this kind of grief often benefits from support, not because you are broken, but because humans were never meant to carry enduring loss alone. Today, we'll explore what chronic grief really is, why it happens, how it shows up in the body, mind, and inner life, how to live with it without shame, and how to recognize when additional professional support may help. So let's begin. What is chronic grief? Chronic grief is grief that does not diminish in the way society expects. It remains present. It stays sensitive. It reactivates, not constantly, but repeatedly. You may be living with chronic grief if months or even years after a loss you still experience waves of sadness suddenly, emotional fragility, persistent exhaustion or heaviness, or difficulty concentrating, guilt for moving forward, or guilt for not moving forward, or the feeling that part of you is still suspended in time. Chronic grief is more likely when the relationship was central to your identity. The loss was sudden, traumatic, or destabilizing. There was no safe space to grieve openly. Secondary losses followed, maybe financial ones, maybe relational ones, maybe physical ones, or, emotional things that we didn't understand were going on within us. Reminders, for example, are unavoidable. The ending was unresolved or it was complicated. These losses reach into deep layers of attachment and identity. Chronic grief doesn't just reflect the past, it shapes how the present feels. And here's a thought that often brings relief. Sometimes chronic grief isn't grief that won't end. It's love that has nowhere to go. So it keeps returning, looking for a place to land. Now, why does chronic grief happen? Contrary to common belief, chronic grief does not happen because someone is dwelling or refusing to move on. It happens because loss affects more than emotions. It affects attachment, identity, memory, all these things. And it impacts our nervous system. So let's look at some of those causes. Number one, the relationship was part of who you were. When someone shaped your daily rhythms, your sense of belonging or your future, you are not just grieving a person. You are grieving who you were in that relationship. Number two, the loss divided life into before and after. Some losses don't just hurt, they reorganize our entire life. You're not grieving a moment, you're grieving an era. Number 3, trauma-interrupted integration. When loss is sudden or overwhelming, the nervous system stays alert. The body remembers even when the mind wants to move on. That's why grief can live in the chest or in the stomach or in the throat or in your sleep or your energy levels, long after logic says, I should be okay by now. Number 4, grief had nowhere to go. If you had to be strong for others, if you returned to responsibility too quickly, if support faded before your grief did, your grief may have been postponed and not resolved. And by the way, that happens a lot. People postpone it because they have to be strong for their families. They have to be there for everybody else. So their own grief is postponed and it's not resolved. And it comes up maybe a year or 2 years later when everybody else is starting to get better. Number 5, life keeps reactivating the loss. Milestones often reopen grief. Birthdays and holidays, new relationships, maybe retirement, maybe having to move, maybe becoming a grandparent, maybe even moments of joy. Because joy reminds us of who we wish would be present. Chronic grief happens because your heart remembers, because attachment was real, because love mattered. So what does chronic grief feel like? People living with chronic grief, they often say things like, why am I not getting better? Or it feels like grief is always just under the surface, ready to surface, ready to come up. I can function, but I'm not the same. Some days it feels as fresh as ever. Or I'm tired of carrying this, but I can't pretend it's gone because it's not gone. None of that is weakness. This is your inner life responding honestly to loss and attachment. Chronic grief often feels like you're carrying a quiet, persistent weight. You're walking around carrying this heavy, heavy load. It's just like a heavy box. You're always carrying it. Longing that never, it's a longing that never fully resolves itself. Or missing someone in new ways as life evolves right in front of you. Or emotional tenderness around anniversaries, things that happen and you just are impacted. It doesn't mean you're always in chronic grief when this happens. But I'm talking about when this happens and it's been years and it's still happening a certain way. We need to address that. Sudden emotional flooding from a song, from a scent, or from a place. I once had somebody in my grief group that it had been 5 years and it was still like the first year for her. No one can criticize that, but that is chronic grief. So there's something important to know. Chronic grief is rarely constant. It's cyclical. So you may be okay for, a few months, and then all of a sudden something happens, it triggers it, and even if it was 3 years, your loss has been 3 years, 4 years, it just triggers it, and now you're in a slump. It can come in seasons, and each season reveals something about what you value, what you need, and what you're still learning to carry. That's why I recommend grief support groups and counselors and therapists. And when you have this type of struggle going on, you shouldn't try to do it by yourself. You should try to get assistance, to get help, to get a listening ear, right? The inner life dimension of chronic grief is also an important facet of what we're talking about today. Chronic grief touches the deepest layers of you, of who you are, your identity, your belonging in this world, your memory, your meaning, your purpose, your trust in life. You may notice periods of numbness, of heightened sensitivity or compassion, of awareness of life's fragility, less tolerance for superficiality, a search for meaning rather than answers, a sense of being changed in ways you can't explain. This is not pathology. Loss changes the architecture of our hearts. And often chronic grief reflects the heart learning how to carry love in a different form. So, how does one live with chronic grief? Again, I go into my toolbox. Gentle, grounded tools are important. These tools are not about fixing grief. They're about supporting your nervous system and honoring your limits and restoring steadiness. Tool number 1, have contained grief time so it doesn't stay with you all day. Do it with writing, with speaking your loved one's name, just doing breathing exercises or crying if you need to cry, listening to a song if you need to listen to a song. When grief has a designated space, it becomes less intrusive on your daily routine, on your work, on what it is that you do every day. Tool number 2, name the secondary losses. Often we're grieving more than one thing. In fact, most of the time, because it impacts our identity, it impacts our routine in life, it impacts our security in life, or maybe our future plans, maybe our energy or our roles that we played. Naming these things reduces the overwhelm, and it brings clarity, and it softens the pain that you might be feeling. Tool number 3, reintroduce joy to your life slowly. Joy returns in whispers, not explosions. Always remember that. Sitting in the sun, listening again to song, to music. Music, by the way, is so healing. Movement, doing exercise, getting yourself up from the regular routine, or even doing a small kindness for somebody. It brings joy. And joy does not replace grief. It coexists with grief. It doesn't mean your grief is going to go away, but there's something about joy. It really is a strength. Tool number 4, pace yourself compassionately. Chronic grief affects stamina. So some days you can do more, and some days it's going to be less. Or you may try to do more, but you still feel like you can only do less. This isn't avoidance. It's wise self-regulation. Tool number 5, create meaning anchors. Meaning stabilizes grief, when you bring meaning to things, you create meaning, it stabilizes grief. So again, letters, journaling, rituals, acts of kindness, living memorials, for example. I recently did a getting through the holidays for people that are grieving. And, one of the things that I talked about is lighting a candle at the table on Thanksgiving and putting their picture there so they're sitting with the whole family. These kinds of memorials, these things, they bring healing. They create space for healing. They create space to breathe and to feel like you're doing something for your loss. So meaning transforms grief from weight into wisdom. Then there's tool number 6, allow safe companionship. You can have lots of friends. You can have lots of people that love you, but not all of them are safe companionships. They may not know how to respond to your grief. But grief will soften when it is witnessed. So how does that happen? Through a grief group, through a therapist, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, getting help through a chaplain, a spiritual leader, a trusted friend. Presence heals in ways advice cannot. A person just sitting next to you can make all the difference in the world. Then there's tool number 7. Carry forward. Not move on, but carry forward. Moving on implies leaving something behind. You're not leaving anything behind. Many people want to carry forward the love, the memory, the influence. That's what I mean by carrying it forward, the legacy that your loved one left, for example. Chronic grief does not mean you're stuck. It means the relationship became part of you and you're having a real hard time with that. Do you need help? Yes, more than likely. You need help. You need someone, maybe a professional, a therapist that can help you through that, or a grief group, or being around people that resonate with your hurt. Tool number 8, know when professional help is supportive. I say this gently, but very clearly. Seeking professional help does not mean you have failed, and it does not mean there's something wrong with you. It may be helpful to reach out if the grief feels overwhelming most days, or if daily functioning is consistently impaired. If you're having trouble sleeping, your appetite's going up and down, or concentration, or you're significantly affected, you have brain fog, all of those things are signs. Hopelessness or numbness feels persistent, or the pain feels unmanageable alone. A therapist, a grief counselor, a chaplain can help you. A social worker can help you carry this with support, not in isolation. We just must always keep at the forefront of our mind that support is not weakness. It's wisdom. The simple things can help more than you know. Before I wind down, I just want to remind all of you, and I say this to my grief group, that depression is not sadness. Sadness is not depression. It doesn't mean you're depressed because you're sad. Please keep that in mind, because many people think they're depressed because they're sad. And if you've had a loss and it has lost, there's an attachment to that was lost, you're going to have sadness, and that's normal. Chronic grief is different. Chronic grief can last and last. So if you don't feel like showering one day or 2 days, that's not chronic grief. If you don't feel like showering for 2 weeks, that's chronic grief. So you want to address these things. So as I wind down with this topic, I want to share a word from the heart. If you're living with chronic grief, hear this. You're not behind. You're not failing. You're not grieving incorrectly. You are carrying a loss that mattered. And losses that matter leave lasting impressions. Your grief reflects your capacity to love deeply. And even if it has stayed longer than expected, there is still beauty available to you. There's still joy ahead. There's still life unfolding within you. Grief may stay, but it does not get to define your future. You are healing slowly, honestly, and with courage. And that's enough. So today, as I close, I want to thank you for spending this time with me on Soul Synergy Network podcast. If this episode resonated, please share it with someone who may be living with chronic grief quietly. And don't forget to subscribe for conversations that support emotional, psychological, and soul-centered well-being. If you'd like to reach me directly, you can email me at soulsynergynetwork@gmail.com. May your heart feel supported today. May your grief find space to breathe. And may you remember, you are allowed to heal at your own pace, and you do not have to do it alone. Until next time, God bless you.